My twin stole everything from me. So I took him down piece by piece, and then I sat in the front row of the church, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring at the polished walnut coffin resting at the altar. Inside lay my father, a man who had spent his entire life making it painfully clear that, between my twin brother and me, only one of us was truly worth his time. A lump rose in my throat, but it wasn't grief. I had let go of that emotion years ago. It was something else, something colder, something final. Beside me, Derek let out a deep, practiced sigh, dabbing at his dry eyes with a crisp white handkerchief. He always had a way of making everything about him, even now, when the focus should have been on our father's final moments. His wife, Julia, leaned into him, offering a silent show of support, her manicured fingers resting delicately on his arm. She looked perfect, as always, dressed in a sleek designer dress, her dark hair styled in effortless waves. Even at a funeral, she managed to exude the effortless wealth and superiority that she and Derek had wielded their entire lives. I swallowed down my irritation and turned my attention toward the second row, where our extended family sat in stiff, uncomfortable silence. My Aunt Clara, the only one in the family who had ever treated me as anything more than an afterthought, gave me a sympathetic glance before looking away. The rest of them avoided my gaze entirely, shifting in their seats as if my very presence was some kind of uncomfortable reminder of an unspoken truth. They all knew. The priest finished his final blessing, murmuring something about redemption and peace, but the words rang hollow to me. As the service ended, people began murmuring their goodbyes, some embracing Derek as if he had suffered the greatest loss of all. I remained seated, staring at the floor, waiting for the inevitable. It didn't take long. After the service, we gathered in a private room at my father's law firm, where his lawyer, a soft-spoken older man named Robert, prepared to read the will. I already knew how this would go. My father had never made a secret of who he valued more. The outcome wasn't going to be a surprise, but that didn't mean it wouldn't sting. Robert cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and glanced down at the neatly stacked papers in front of him. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here. As you know, your father was a meticulous man, and his final wishes have been outlined clearly. He flipped through a few pages, pausing before reading aloud. To my son Derek, I leave the family estate, all financial holdings and business shares, along with full control over all remaining assets. To my son Nathan, he hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough for me to notice. I leave my personal belongings and the knowledge that he has always been capable of standing on his own. Silence. A cold, numb feeling spread through my chest, but I kept my face unreadable, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing a reaction. I had spent my entire life being overlooked, ignored, pushed aside in favor of the golden child. This was just the final, legal confirmation of what I had always known. I felt a hand on mine and looked up to see Julia offering me a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Your father really admired your independence, Nathan, she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. He knew you didn't need the extra support. I pulled my hand away slowly, my voice even. You knew, didn't you? I asked, my eyes locking onto Derek's. Derek exhaled through his nose, tilting his head slightly, like I had just accused him of something ridiculous. It's not like I had any control over Dad's wishes, he said with a casual shrug. He just did what he thought was fair. I studied his face, looking for even a hint of guilt, but there was nothing. Just smug indifference, the same look he had given me our entire lives. He wasn't surprised. He had expected this. He had probably been in on it the whole time. Aunt Clara, the only person in the room who seemed remotely disgusted, muttered something under her breath, shaking her head. But Derek didn't care, and neither did the rest of them. My father's decision had been made, and as far as they were concerned, that was the end of it. I stood up, smoothing my shirt as I turned to Robert. Thank you for your time, I said, my voice steady. I won't be contesting the will. Derek's brow furrowed slightly. He had expected me to fight, to argue, to beg. Instead, I stepped past him, leaning in just enough that only he could hear. You always thought you were untouchable, I murmured, my voice calm. You have no idea how wrong you are. His shoulders relaxed, mistaking my words for surrender. I walked out of that office with my head held high, not because I was accepting defeat, but because I had already made my decision. Derek might have stolen my inheritance, but he had made a fatal mistake. He thought I would walk away. He thought I would let this go. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of it all settle in. The words from the will played on repeat in my head, taunting me with their finality. My father had left Derek everything. The estate, the businesses, the wealth, all of it. And for me, a condescending reminder that I was independent enough not to need a damn thing. As if struggling through college, juggling multiple jobs, and building a life on my own had been some kind of voluntary performance instead of pure survival. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping me from my thoughts. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Sure enough, a message from Aunt Clara appeared on the screen, her concern evident in the words. Nathan, I hope you're okay. What your father did was cruel, and I want you to know that you deserved better. If you need anything, I'm here. I hesitated before responding. Clara had always been the only one in the family who saw through the favoritism, but even she had never been able to change anything. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted something real, something that would make this right. But there was nothing she could do. Thanks, Clara. I'm fine. Just tired. It was a lie, of course, but one that was easier than explaining what was really going through my head. I closed my messages and pulled open my laptop, intending to distract myself with meaningless scrolling, but instead, my fingers hesitated over the keyboard. A thought, small and insistent, began to form. I hadn't fought for my inheritance because I knew it wouldn't change anything. Derek would always be the favored son, the one who got everything handed to him on a silver platter. But what if, just once, I could take something back? Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened a search tab and typed in the name of my father's law firm. Robert, the family lawyer, had been the one to read the will, but he hadn't written it. Someone else had handled the revisions. I scrolled through the staff directory until I found a name that looked familiar. Daniel Pierce, Senior Estate Planner. I clicked on his contact information and found an email address. My heart pounded as I started typing. Mr. Pierce, I have some questions regarding my father's will. Would you be available to meet in person? I'd appreciate your time. I hovered over the send button for a second before pressing it. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find, but something in my gut told me there was more to this than just my father's final wishes. And I was done being the overlooked one. The next morning, I checked my inbox and found a reply waiting for me. Nathan, I'd be happy to meet. My office is available at noon tomorrow. Let me know if that works for you. I confirmed immediately. When I arrived at the law firm the next day, the receptionist led me to a small, windowed office where Daniel Pierce sat behind a cluttered desk, adjusting his glasses as I entered. He was older than I remembered, with silver-streaked hair and deep lines around his eyes. He gestured for me to sit. Nathan, I was sorry to hear about your father's passing. What can I help you with? I leaned forward, keeping my tone neutral. I just wanted some clarification on the will, specifically when it was changed. Pierce frowned slightly, flipping through a folder before settling on a document. Your father updated his estate plans about 6 months ago. He wanted to ensure that Derek received full control over the assets. I nodded, forcing myself to appear unfazed. And before that, what did the original version say? Pierce hesitated. I'm not sure if I can disclose that information. Was I included? I interrupted, my voice sharp but controlled. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Yes, the original division was 50-50 between you and Derek. A slow, cold wave of anger spread through me, but I kept my expression neutral. So what changed? Your father said he had reconsidered, that Derek would be more responsible with the estate. Pierce explained, though something in his tone sounded off. But I will admit, he wasn't the one who initiated the conversation about changing it. Derek came to us first. I sat back, exhaling slowly. There it was, the confirmation I had been waiting for. Derek hadn't just benefited from our father's favoritism. He had engineered it. He had convinced our father to cut me out, had planted the idea that I didn't need anything, that it was only logical for him to inherit everything. Did my father seem hesitant about it? I asked, my voice calm, but laced with something colder. Pierce hesitated before nodding. To be honest, yes. He mentioned that you had built your own career without help and that he admired that. But Derek assured him that you wouldn't mind, that you wouldn't want to be tied down by the estate. I almost laughed. The audacity of it. Derek hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He had decided for me that I didn't even deserve a choice. I stood, adjusting my jacket. Thank you for your time. That was all I needed to know. Pierce gave me a curious glance. Are you planning to contest the will? I met his gaze and shook my head. No, that would be too easy. I walked out of the office feeling strangely calm. Derek thought he had won, that he had tied everything up neatly in his favor. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. I wasn't going to fight this in court. I wasn't going to beg for what was rightfully mine. I was going to take Derek apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the life he had stolen. I just needed to find the right way to start. I sat in my car outside Derek's estate, the engine idling as I stared at the grand, sprawling house that now belonged entirely to him. The sheer audacity of it, the way he had taken everything without hesitation, without a second thought, without even a flicker of guilt, made my grip on the steering wheel tighten until my knuckles ached. The manicured lawn, the luxury cars gleaming in the driveway, the towering security gate designed to keep people like me on the outside. It all served as a monument to his victory, his ability to manipulate, to twist, to take. He had won, and he knew it. I had spent my entire life watching him walk away with everything that should have been shared. As children, he was the one who got the new toys while I got his hand-me-downs, the one who got praise while I was told to try harder next time, the one who could do no wrong in the eyes of our parents. It had been a script written long before either of us had a say in it, a role I had been assigned without consent. But that night, as I sat there watching the warm glow of the lights spilling through his windows, I realized something. Derek thought the story was over, but he had no idea that I had just picked up the pen. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through the messages from the private investigator I had hired the day after I met with the lawyer. At first, I had hesitated, wondering if I was letting my anger get the best of me, if I was becoming too much like Derek by plotting in the shadows. But then the first batch of photos had arrived, and any doubts I had evaporated. The images told a story even uglier than I had expected. Derek, dressed in one of his tailored suits, standing too close to a woman who was most definitely not Julia, his hand resting against the small of her back in a way that was far too intimate to be casual. Another picture, taken on a different night, captured them slipping into his car, her body language filled with familiarity, with comfort, with something that had clearly been going on for far too long. Her name was Lily, a woman nearly a decade younger than him, someone he had been seeing in secret for 5 years. For 5 years, Derek had been playing the perfect husband, parading Julia around at social events, letting her bask in the illusion of a flawless marriage, while he spent his nights wrapped around someone else. Julia wasn't an innocent victim, not by a long shot. She had always been just as ruthless, just as obsessed with wealth and power as Derek was. But there was one thing people like Julia could never tolerate, and that was public humiliation. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I selected the photos, attached them to a message, and sent them to Julia from an anonymous number. No words, no explanation, just the undeniable proof that she had spent the last 5 years as the punchline to a joke she didn't even know existed. Then I waited. The fallout didn't take long. 2 nights later, I sat in a cafe not far from Derek's neighborhood, my phone vibrating with real-time updates from my investigator, who had positioned himself just down the street. Julia had confronted Derek the moment he walked through the door, her voice sharp enough to cut through the walls, demanding an explanation. Derek, ever the master manipulator, had tried to play it off at first, tried to tell her she was overreacting, that someone was trying to sabotage them. But Julia wasn't stupid, and she wasn't in the mood to be pacified. She had the timestamps, the locations, the sheer volume of evidence. And the moment she realized there was no talking his way out of it, She lost whatever composure she had left. She threw his clothes out onto the front lawn, her voice rising with each accusation, calling him a liar, a fraud, a pathetic excuse for a man. Derek, caught between trying to calm her down and trying to save face in front of their wealthy neighbors, made the mistake of downplaying it. "She's just some girl, Julia," he had said, his voice dismissive. "It doesn't mean anything. You knew how this worked." That was the moment he lost her completely. Julia wasn't upset about the affair itself. She was upset that she looked like a fool. That line must have shattered whatever control she had left, because within minutes, she was shoving him out the front door, slamming it behind him, leaving him standing outside with his belongings scattered across the pavement. By the time I received the final update that night, Derek was alone, pacing in his driveway, his phone pressed to his ear, no doubt calling one of his contacts to fix the mess. But there was no fixing this. Not when I was just getting started. The next day, I made sure the scandal didn't just stay between them. Using a burner email account, I sent the photos to select people in Derek's world, his colleagues, his business partners, even a few influential figures from the charity organizations he and Julia had been so deeply involved with. But I didn't just send the pictures. I added carefully crafted implications, subtle but devastating. Is this the kind of man you want handling your business affairs? Shocking to see someone who preaches integrity acting like this behind closed doors. Just a little insight into what really happens when the cameras aren't around. People didn't need much convincing. Derek had always been arrogant, always assumed people would look the other way as long as he kept up appearances. But the moment those appearances cracked, the moment the whispers started, people turned on him faster than he could react. By the end of the week, everything around him was beginning to crumble. His business partners, the ones who had once showered him with praise, suddenly distanced themselves, pulling out of deals, citing unforeseen complications. Julia, once his perfect, polished accessory, had moved out of the house, taking half of their accounts with her, ensuring that the separation would be as painful as possible. For the first time in his life, Derek was losing. And the best part? He had no idea who was pulling the strings. I watched it all unfold with the kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. But I knew better than to get comfortable. Derek wasn't the type to go down quietly. He would fight back. He would search for the person responsible, and when he did, he would find me. I welcomed it, because I wasn't done yet. Derek had always believed he was untouchable, that no matter what mistakes he made, no matter how recklessly he played with people's lives, he would always land on his feet. He had spent years manipulating our father, charming investors, bending every rule in his favor, and walking away without a scratch. He had never once been held accountable for the things he had done. That was the difference between us. I had spent my life learning how to survive, how to endure, how to push forward despite everything. Derek had spent his life learning how to take. Now, for the first time, Derek had something taken from him. I had expected him to go into damage control mode immediately, to find a way to manipulate the situation back in his favor, to convince everyone around him that this was just some misunderstanding, some minor inconvenience he would quickly overcome. Instead, he had done something I hadn't predicted. He had disappeared. For days, no one saw him. His business partners were left scrambling. His lawyer had no answers, and Julia, who had spent years defending his name, was making it very clear that she wasn't going to clean up the mess he had created. The house sat dark and empty, the luxury cars still parked in the driveway, untouched, as if they were waiting for an owner who might never return. At first, I thought he had skipped town, that maybe he had taken whatever assets he could liquidate and fled to one of the offshore accounts he thought no one knew about. But then, on the fifth day, I finally got my answer. Aunt Clara called me, her voice low and tense, the way it always was whenever she had to tell me something she knew I wouldn't want to hear. "I saw him," she said, skipping past any small talk, straight to the part that mattered. "He's staying at some cheap hotel outside of town, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions when someone pays in cash." I didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of that information settle in. Derek, who had spent his entire life surrounding himself with wealth, who had built his entire identity around status, had been reduced to hiding out in a rundown motel. What do you think he's planning? I finally asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear her say it. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she let out a slow sigh. Revenge, she said, voice heavy with certainty. He knows someone did this to him, and sooner or later, he's going to figure out who. She didn't have to say the rest out loud. Derek wasn't the kind of person who took betrayal lightly, and in his mind, this wasn't justice. This was an attack. He wasn't going to sit back and accept that he had lost. He was going to find a way to strike back, to rebuild, to claw his way out of the mess he had created, and when he did, he was going to make sure whoever had ruined him suffered for it. And that was exactly what I wanted. I had never expected Derek to take this quietly. I hadn't spent weeks orchestrating his downfall just to watch him slink away into obscurity. No, I wanted him to fight, to lash out, to make mistakes. Because the more desperate he became, the more reckless he would be. And reckless men were easier to destroy. I thanked Clara for the information, assured her I had everything under control, and then hung up. I had spent so much time planning his fall, but now I had to plan what came next. I knew Derek. He wasn't going to come at me legally, wasn't going to waste time with lawyers or courts. He didn't believe in fair fights. He was going to come at me from the shadows, just like I had done to him. I needed to be ahead of him. So I dug deeper. I already had the financial records, already knew about the fraudulent transactions he had buried under layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. But now, I started looking at the people he had screwed over, investors, former business partners, anyone who had ever taken a deal with him and later regretted it. And I found exactly what I needed. A former associate named Marcus, a man who had once been one of Derek's closest business allies before things had gone sideways. A man who had lost millions after Derek backed out of a deal and left him holding the fallout. A man who, according to several very carefully worded court documents, had been looking for an opportunity to settle the score. I met with him in a quiet bar on the far side of the city, a place where no one would recognize either of us, where we could talk without being overheard. Marcus was older than I expected, his face lined with years of experience, his expression unreadable as he stirred the whiskey in front of him. "So," he said, without looking up, "you're the one who finally took him down." I didn't confirm or deny it. I just waited. He took a slow sip, considering something before letting out a short, dry chuckle. "Didn't think I'd live to see the day," he admitted, shaking his head. "But I can't say I'm surprised. Derek's been making enemies for years. That's why I'm here," I said, finally breaking my silence. "I want to make sure he stays down." Marcus set his glass down and studied me, his sharp gaze assessing, calculating. "And what exactly do you need from me?" I leaned in slightly, my voice quiet but firm. "I need to make sure he can't rebuild. That no one trusts him, that no one will give him another chance." Marcus exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the table in thought. "You know," he mused, "ruining a man's reputation is one thing, but making sure he stays ruined? That takes precision." I met his gaze without hesitation. "I have precision." A slow smile spread across his face, something knowing, something amused. "All right then," he said, raising his glass in a silent toast. "Let's make sure Derek never gets up again." By the time I left that bar, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Derek wasn't just going to lose everything. He was going to lose the chance to ever get it back. And by the time he realized what had happened, it would already be too late. Derek must have thought he still had time. He must have believed that if he just kept his head down long enough, if he played his cards right, if he found the right people to manipulate, he could climb out of the hole he had dug for himself. That was the problem with people like him. They never believed consequences would stick. They spent their whole lives skating by on charm, on deceit, on the assumption that everyone around them could be bent to their will if they just applied the right pressure. But Derek had never met resistance before, not the kind that was willing to go as far as he was, not the kind that had spent years watching, waiting, learning exactly how to dismantle him piece by piece. I had expected him to go after me directly, to storm into my apartment or track me down in some attempt to intimidate me into backing off. Instead, he had gone back to what he knew best: manipulation, deception, control. He started reaching out to old contacts, former business partners, The kinds of people who had once seen him as a golden opportunity, a man who could turn their investments into something profitable. He must have thought that enough time had passed, that people had short memories, that all it would take was a few carefully worded explanations, a few strategic lies, and he could claw his way back into their good graces. But Marcus and I had made sure that wouldn't happen. By the time Derek started making his rounds, his reputation had already been completely dismantled. The whispers about his financial mismanagement, the rumors about his shady dealings, the carefully placed reminders about his legal troubles had already spread too far. No one was willing to take the risk on a man who had lost everything, who had no credibility left to stand on. His name had become radioactive in business circles, a cautionary tale that no one wanted to be associated with. Still, he tried. He called in every favor he had left, tried to convince people that everything had been blown out of proportion, that he was just the victim of a personal vendetta. But for the first time in his life, no one was listening. Then came the final blow. Derek had been careful about hiding his more illegal financial activities, but even the most meticulous men made mistakes when they were desperate. With Marcus's help, I had gathered enough evidence to ensure that Derek would never be able to recover. Fraudulent transactions, embezzlement, falsified documents, things that had once been small enough to sweep under the rug but, when put together, painted a very different picture. We leaked the files anonymously to the right people, regulatory agencies, journalists, former investors who had lost money because of him. The investigation opened within a week. The moment Derek realized what was happening, he panicked. He tried to move his remaining assets, tried to liquidate accounts, tried to pull whatever cash he had left into offshore holdings. But his accounts had already been flagged, his transactions monitored. The noose was tightening around his neck, and for the first time, he couldn't talk his way out of it. The last time I saw him in person, it wasn't at some grand confrontation, wasn't in a heated moment of revelation where he finally realized who had been behind everything. It was in a hotel lobby, the same rundown motel Aunt Clara had told me he had been hiding in. I had gone there to make sure he saw me, to make sure he understood exactly what had happened, exactly who had done this to him. When he spotted me across the room, I watched as recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by realization. He knew. For the first time in his life, Derek looked at me with fear. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just held his gaze for a long, silent moment before turning and walking away, leaving him standing there with the weight of his own failure pressing down on him. That was the last time I ever saw him. Within a month, he was completely bankrupt. The estate was seized, his remaining assets frozen, and his legal troubles piled up faster than he could handle. The once proud, once powerful man who had spent his entire life taking from others now had nothing left to take. And I walked away without a scratch. I didn't keep the house. I didn't keep the inheritance. The money meant nothing to me by the time it was all over. I sold the estate, cut ties with every toxic remnant of my family, and moved somewhere new, somewhere Derek's shadow couldn't reach me. I took what I needed, but the rest? I left it behind, because I didn't need wealth to prove that I had won. Derek had spent his life believing that money made him untouchable. I had proven him wrong. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free.